Hello everyone, it's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. So a few years ago, I made a video where I went over my top 10 anime-only decks that I really wanted to see get printed in the OCG/TCG. Well, here we are 5 years later, and that video is super outdated. Spectre is on the thumbnail. I believe Fossils was mentioned in that video. Basically, a lot of the entries on that list have actually been printed, which is an amazing thing. And so I think it's time to do a little bit of an update for you guys. So in this video, we are going to go through all of the anime, and I'm going to tell you from those first 6 Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows what are the top 10 anime-exclusive decks that I would love to see printed in the near future in the real game, and then, of course, Master Duel. So please feel free to play along down below. Come up with your own lists. Let me know some decks that you really want to see get printed. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. I hope you enjoy. Number 10, the Tennis Archetype, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Now, I know people are going to flame me for wasting an entry on this list with the tennis archetype, but I'm not putting it here for a meme or a joke. I would genuinely love to see a tennis archetype printed in the main game. Now, here's the thing. I played varsity tennis when I was in high school. It sounds a lot more impressive than it was. Our varsity team was not good at all, but I was a decent tennis player, and I still love to play tennis every now and then. Now I play pickleball, which is kind of like a minier version of tennis, but I certainly feel when it comes to sports, I'm at my best when I can hit a ball with a racket. I think that's where I excel at when it comes to sports. If you've seen me, you know I'm not playing football or anything that's more, athletic requiring, but when it comes to hitting balls with rackets, I feel like I'm pretty good. So the tennis archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is one that I would genuinely love to see printed. Now the character that used it, Harrington Rosewood, only used like 6 or 7 cards from that deck, so obviously we would need to get a massive overhaul if this was ever going to be an archetype in the game, but this one was in the video 6 years ago that I made, and it's always going to be in the video when I make this topic. And with a lot of the really cool ones coming from GX, including Fossils and Clear World, let's get to the tennis, baby. Number 9, Hydra Drives, Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. As you can imagine, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains anime has quite a few entries on this list. It actually has 3, which is the most of any show, and Hydra Drives are at the bottom of the 3 that I would most like to see printed. This deck was used by Bowman, who was the Season 2 main villain of that show, and I think this deck has definitely a lot of potential to be really cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Sayu's deck from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, where there is a lot of reliance on luck and chance, and for that reason, the deck's probably not going to be that good if it ever did get printed, but I feel like it still would be really cool to see one of the main villains, at least, of Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains have their deck actually come. And when I look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, especially in Season 2, there are a lot of cool decks that I hope do get printed sooner rather than later, and Hydra Drives is certainly one of them. Number 8, Gattling Ogre, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. This deck was played by Lawton during the Crashtown arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, I feel like this is the only deck that has not been printed. Correct me if I'm wrong down below. Maybe there's a card here or there. But when it comes to like a full-on deck, I think Lawton's is the only one that's left. And so for that reason, I'd love to see it get printed, because then you can say we have all the decks that were played in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds pretty much all fully printed, and I think that would be really, really cool. I also would love to see how this deck would operate. As someone who is a degenerate fan of the card Chain Energy, I think the whole burn damage element of this deck is actually really fascinating. Now, obviously, you do not want to have a deck that can complete the old first turn combo. That's not really good for the game, the old FTK, and that is what Lawton was able to do in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, but there's more life points in the actual game, 8,000 versus 4,000, and I'm sure the effects of these cards are not going to allow you to do something like that if they do get printed. So I'd love to see their take on this deck, and I hope it does get printed at some point. Number 7, CCC from Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. The CCC deck is played by Rara, and this is a deck that for a very long time I really didn't have much of an interest in, but I've actually gone back and watched some duels in Arc 5, and I feel like this deck is pretty cool. And I mean, DDD, which was played by his brother Akiba Reiji, the more famous duelist of the two, obviously being the main rival from that show. DDD is a very popular archetype, and I think seeing this archetype get printed would be very, very cool as well. Arc 5 has actually had had Earthbound Servants printed recently, and that was always my most wanted deck from that series. So now when I look at Arc 5, there's no decks that I think urgently need to get printed, but there are two that come to mind. CCC is one, and the next one is the very next entry. Number 6, Spirit Tech from Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. Yes, you did not think that I would be putting a deck played by the incompetent, the incomparable Akaba Leo on this list. But here we are. Here we are. Spirit Tech, I will say, remove Akaba Leo from it. It's a really cool deck. And I really think that it would be a lot of fun to actually be able to play with this deck. I think some of the combos Akaba Leo did was really, really cool. Now, granted, we really only got to see that in the one duel he had versus his son and Yugioh, but Spirit Tech is probably my number one deck that I'd like to see printed from Arc 5. That and CCC, they're very close in these rankings, but those are certainly my top two. And when I think of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, those are the two decks that I would love to see come to the game at some point in the near future. Number 5, Storm Riders, Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. Another Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains deck makes the list, and this one is played by Windy, one of the secondary villains in that Season 2 arc. Storm Riders is a deck that I really thought we would have gotten printed by now. I know there are a lot of people that want to see the Wind Ignis's deck actually printed. I think Windy had some really fun duels. He had a great one against Revolver. He also had a really good one against Soulburner, and we saw the Storm Rider deck on display. It's got some pretty cool ace monsters, and I think if it wasn't for another Ignis that we'll get to in a little bit, Windy would have the coolest anime exclusive deck from Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, but he does get outmatched from not only a deck perspective, but also from a villain and character perspective by Lightning, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But Storm Riders should get printed, and I would hope they're going to get printed in the next couple of years. Number 4, New Order from Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. This is by far my number one choice for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal anime-only deck when it comes to this topic, and New Orders have been my number one choice for many, many years. I'm starting to worry that we are never going to get this deck. This deck was played by Elephas in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal anime, and this deck's got plenty of XYZ monsters. I actually believe they have 7 XYZ monsters, including Etheric Ammon, which is a rare rank 13 XYZ monster. New Order 13 Etheric Ammon. It's crazy that there is a rank 13 monster out there that we just have not gotten printed yet. I would love to see this deck come into the game at some point. This is by far the only Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal deck that I really want to see printed. It's number 4 for me, so it's a pretty high priority one, and I just hope that the Konami team has not forgotten about this deck, because it was, to me, one of the coolest decks from Zexal, and the fact that it has still not been printed is a little bit of a sin. Number 3, the Armor archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. You want to talk about another deck that has not been printed after many, many years? Well, you don't have to look any further than the Armor archetype from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which was played by Valen. I think the duel that Valen and Joey had is one of the best from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. If you watched my video where I ranked every single duel, that duel was certainly in the top 20 percentile, I believe. It was definitely in the top 20, and it's such a memorable and unique duel in the franchise where you see these two literally beating the crap out of each other. And now, while the Armor deck would not play as cool as it looked in the anime, because you can't go to a locals and put on actual pieces of armor to fist fight your opponent like Valen and Joey did in that duel, I still think this is a really, really cool deck, and it's one that deserves to be printed. I mean, we saw this deck dance on our screens 20 years ago, 2 decades ago. When you talk about old-timey decks that need to get printed, the Armor deck is at the top of that list. It's number 3 for me overall, and I really hope we see Valen's deck come to the game very, very soon. Number 2, Armatos Leios, Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. You knew that Lightning's deck was going to be very high on my want list, and even though it's not my number 1 want, it is certainly one of my highest wants when it comes to anime exclusive decks. This was one of the coolest decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. The ancient Roman theme that this deck had was so fun to watch, and Lightning was such a memorable character. I think looking at all the characters on this list, Lightning is certainly the best by far. I actually don't think any character on this list comes close. And I think when you have a character that was as good and compelling as Lightning, it makes you want to play their deck and feel like you're them that much more. Maybe besides the feel like you're them part. But you know what? If you want to live your evil fantasies out, there you go. You can do it through Lightning's deck whenever it comes to the TCG and OCG. I thought this year with the Light Duelist pack and the Animation Chronicles, I thought there was such a good chance that we were going to get Lightning, and we have not. We still have not gotten this deck. Granted, Vrains only ended about 5 years ago, and I think Konami knows how many people actually want this deck to be printed, so that's probably why they're holding off. I would bet you that we will see this deck printed by 2027, and if we don't, that's going to be a real problem. Number 1, Darkness from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. This is my most wanted archetype to be printed into the game that is still anime exclusive. Now, I have it over Armatos Leios for one major reason, and that's because of time. It has been much longer that we have been without the Darkness cards printed than the Armatos Leios, and I actually love the Darkness archetype, and I loved Darkness as a final villain. I know Darkness, a lot of people aren't like the biggest fan of, obviously being the final villain of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but I think his presence in that very final duel against Judai was incredible, and I think the cards that he used, you know, Darkness Bramble and the Darkness spell cards, would be so fun to play with in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. And right now, in Master Duel, we are seeing one of the main Yu-Gi-Oh! Villains have a super meta deck, and that is Yubel. Yubel is insanely meta right now in Master Duel. So maybe in a couple of years, the Darkness cards can be meta, and we can get another Yu-Gi-Oh! GX villain to kind of replace Yubel. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't think the Darkness archetype has anywhere near the potential to be as deadly and destructive as the Yubel archetype. Yubel also just got a new wave of support not too long ago, which really took that deck to another level. The Darkness deck hasn't even been printed, but we just got Clear World, so I'm hopeful that the other striking villain of Season 4, the main one, will get their deck printed very, very soon. And guys, that wraps it up. Those are my top 10 anime-only decks that need to get printed. Let me know if you agree with my list. Let me know what some of your top anime-only decks are that you would love to see come to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game in the very near future. I'm looking forward to all your lists and thoughts down below. As always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.